All right, folks, this is our Maya 5 demo for the new dummy rig assignment for this year. So you can find the Maya file that you need for the assignment linked in the assignment. This video is going to be replaced with the one we are filming right now. But the Maya file, when you click on it, should open up in a new window and simply download it. So I have already downloaded it in my previous period. So the Maya 5 test dummy rig is in my downloads, and I'll go ahead and open that up. Don't save. And so you should see something that looks like this fellow here. And so this is a much more complete humanoid bipedal rig than we had with our Lego dude that we worked with on Tuesday. So this has a mostly accurate set of joints. I will say it is missing the clavicle, right, if we wanted to move our shoulders forward and back. But as for the ball joints and such, we have more joints than we did with the Lego dude, right? So we have our foot, which should be pivoting at the ankle. We have our knee, right, which everything below the knee should be pivoting from the knee, right? And from our hip, everything below the hip, the entire leg, should be pivoting from the hip ball socket. And then, of course, right, this leg should be duplicated onto the opposite side of the body. And then furthermore, I should be able to rotate the entirety of the bottom of the body together, right? So that's where we're headed with the lower body. And then similarly, with the upper body, we've got a hand, right, which should be pivoting at the wrist. It's a little off, so we'll need to fix it. We have the elbow, and everything below the elbow should be moving from the elbow joint. And then similarly, the shoulder joint, everything on the arm should be pivoting from the shoulder joint when we move this. And then, of course, it should have two arms that when we pivot the upper body, the torso, should be moving with it as well. So let's start this process. So the first thing I would say is that this is meant to be very particular and detail-oriented. So if you make mistakes, don't be afraid to undo back a lot, okay? So, or if you make significant enough mistakes, just crumple up your paper, so to speak. Re-download the rig and just start fresh, right? So this is much more complicated than our past assignments have been. So I expect there to be some mistakes. So for starters, just this object that is the foot, right? We want to change the pivot point so that it is pivoting at the ankle rather than the center of the foot, right? So the good news is that if I turn on my wireframe mode by tapping the 4 key so I can see inside of my objects, well, the end of our shin, for our shin object here, there is a vertex at the very bottom center of that object that will serve as a place for me to move my pivot point so that I can move the foot from the ankle. So again, I'm in object selection mode. Hold down D and V. So again, holding down D is for moving the pivot point. Holding down D and V allows you to move and snap the pivot point. And I will put it on this dot at the bottom center of the ankle. So if I turn on my shading by pressing 5, I go to my rotate tool. Now the dude's shoe pivots at the ankle. So we got that part set. Now this is where it starts to become more complicated, right? Because it's not enough that we rotate the object, that is the shin, right? Because one, this pivot point is in the middle of the leg rather than the knee. But also, when we move this, we would want it to move in a way where we are moving the foot alongside or along with the shin and the knee, right? So to do so, I'm going to select this object and select this object, and they will live together in a group by Command G, right? And so when you make a new group, you'll know you did it right. 1, it'll say items grouped successfully. 2, your pivot point will go back to the origin, or it should go back to the origin, right? And so, again, I'm going to turn on my wireframe mode. And I'm going to move my pivot point holding D and V. So I just moved it up there closer to where I'm headed so I can zoom in, make sure I get it accurately, right? Hold D and V again, drag and move it to the center of the knee. Now again, this is for the group of the shin and the foot, right? So if I still click on my object for the shin, the pivot point for this didn't change, right? But if I click on the shin and hit the up arrow to reselect its group, the group that is the shin and the foot, the pivot point should be set at the knee, which it is, and therefore when I move this group, I can see that they're moving together. And then additionally, right, because they're grouped, I can still click on the foot here itself and rotate that on its own, independently of the knee. So that part is good. So here's where it's really going to start getting more complicated, folks. So we want to group this entire leg together. Now, the most common mistake I see on this assignment is that once they've done this part right, they then go and select all of the objects individually and group those together. Now you'll see, having done that, so my whole leg is grouped together, but instead now I have separated this foot out of the group it was in with the leg, or the shin rather, on the leg, right? It just goes back to the whole leg group. So here's where the mistake can be made. Let me undo back to before I made the mistake, right? So when you are going to group this whole leg, right, you are taking the group that is below the knee, and you are, and I'm on my select tool now, holding shift, you are grouping that with the object that is the hip, right? So again, I want the group that is everything below the knee and add the object that is the hip, and therefore when I make a new group, that group will control the whole leg. So if I go from the foot, that still works. Hit the up arrow, that still works, still goes to the knee. Hit up arrow one more time, and that is the whole leg, right? So now I just need to fix the pivot point for this leg. So that was the trickier part, but yet it gets even more trickier, folks. So with the hip, unlike the other two that we just did, there is no vertex inside of this hip joint that I can easily snap my pivot point to by using snap to vertex. Or is there? So what I can tell you is that there's a vertex in the front and center of this sphere, the same as there is a vertex on the side and center of this sphere. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm on my group that is the whole leg, and I'm going to put this pivot point just loosely up here on the ball joint at the hip, and we're going to go into our front view, and I'm going to just start by holding D and V, and I'm going to drag this and make sure it's on the center front, right? So that looks good, center and front. However, that's not enough, right? Because if we go to rotate this, whoa. So again, so if we put it on the front and center, it's not going to move from the right spot. So now we need to move it back so it is in the center of this sphere, right? So now I'll go into my side view. Again, I'll come down here, wireframe mode by hitting 4. And now here is where, when I hold down D and V, I would want to point out when you hover over these edges you'll see that it gives me, it's saying, hey, do you want to align? You want to align with this? You want to align with this edge? You want to align with this vertex, etc.? So we want to change the alignment of our pivot point. So instead of grabbing the golden circle like we have been to drag the pivot point manually, we're going to use the arrow while holding down D and V to align from this direction. We're aligning it from the side, center, right? Holding D and V, pushing the arrow, right? Pushing the arrow till the center. If you've done it correctly, that should now move the pivot point into the inside of this sphere. And so if I turn on my shading, now it pivots correctly, right? So again, it's very easy to make mistakes on those steps. So keep checking your work as you go. If you find that you made mistakes, undo what you did, right? So again, if you click from the foot, it should pivot at the ankle. From the foot, if I hit the up arrow, it should go to the group of everything below the knee. That can pivot from the knee joint. If I hit the up arrow one more time, it should be pivoting from the space inside of the ball joint at the hip. Now, before we start doing the upper body, let's finish up with the lower body by duplicating this leg to the other side. So instead of just duplicating it and moving it manually, which you realistically could do, right? I am going to do things in a fancier way. So people often ask me, how do you move things symmetrically? How do you flip thing over an axis of symmetry? So this object has been constructed symmetrically over the axis on the origin, right? But also this object, here, I'm going to undo my duplicate real quick so I don't forget it. This object has symmetry, right? There's an edge running down the middle of this. There's an edge running down the middle of this. There's an edge running down the middle of this. So there's plenty of vertices that are also aligned with our axis of symmetry. So I'm going to take, again, this group that is everything on the leg, and I'm going to duplicate that group. And then, so what I'm going to do to make sure things flip symmetrically is I'm going to put my pivot point on the top center of the pelvis. And then that way, I know it's on the center of the body. And then this is where I would point out with the move tool that left and right, in this case, is the x-axis, as it should be. And this is the object in its default position where the scale is +1. So if the scale is +1 and our axis of symmetry is here, ergo, scale x at -1 will be on the opposite side of the body. And then finally, now that it's been moved over symmetrically, I just need to reset the pivot point as I did on the other side of the body, right? So put it on the front middle. Let me double check in my front view, right? That looks accurate. Yes. So then I go back to my side view again, and we do the same thing, holding down D, holding down V, pushing this back until it aligns with the center. Then I can let go. And then if I did it right, this leg that I just duplicated should now also pivot correctly, right? If I come down here, boom, that's correct. Up arrow, that's correct. Up arrow, that's correct. Now again, this assignment has many opportunities to make mistakes. So when we want to combine the whole lower body, what we want to do, similar to when we were binding the hip bone to the knees and below, we want this object and this object, which are both at the top of their hierarchies for the legs. So I have those objects both selected. I hit the up arrow, and that will select both groups for both of the legs. And those two groups plus the pelvis object, if I group those, right, they'll all be grouped together. And then wireframe mode, so I can move my pivot point to the bottom of the spinal column, which I think I just did. Yes, so the little cylinder that's in there. So if you've done everything correctly on the lower body, if I start at the foot, boom, goes up one more to the knee, boom, goes up to the hip, boom, goes up to the pelvis. And so now I could have his whole lower body, you know, flip back and forth or spin left and right, right? So, again, I understand that's very complicated. I designed this assignment to kick your ass, so it should be difficult. Now, on the upper body, very much the same, right? So we'll start with our hand, right? We just need to make sure that the hand has its pivot point set to the wrist. Oops. So make sure I got it on the center of that. Easy peasy. And then same thing here, right? The hand and the forearm. Command G to group those. It will be slightly more annoying because the pivot point goes way down to the bottom. So I'm just going to click and drag it up here. Then zoom back in. And that should go to right there. Very good. And again, this is for the control for the group of everything below the elbow. So again, if I select the forearm, the object itself, I don't care about the pivot point for the object. I only care about the group that it's in. Is the pivot point at the elbow? Yes, it is. And then again, just like with the leg, right, we want the group that is everything elbow and below, plus the object that is the upper arm, the bicep. Command G to group that. And again, we'll put the pivot point loosely up here. And now I want to get it into the front middle. So I'll go ahead into my front view. Come up here. So front middle in this case is this one, right? So now I'll go into my side view. Come up here. And then same concept, holding down D and V, again using the arrow to change the alignment, push it back until it's aligned with the center, let go, and now this group that controls everything below the shoulder works. And so again, if I start from the hand, does it pivot from the wrist? If I hit the up arrow, does that group control from the elbow? If I hit the up arrow again, does that group control from the shoulder joint, right? So if I have one arm done correctly, I will again duplicate. I will again move my pivot point onto the axis of symmetry. So I'll use the little badge I put on him. I will again change my scale factor from +1 to -1. So it flips across the body. And then I simply need to repair the pivot point yet again. So 5, and then it should be, I believe, this one right here. Then I go into my side view, D and V, push the arrows to change the alignment. Boom. And then before I group the whole upper body, the head, if you want to get fancy, right, its pivot point should be on the top of the neck, right? So there we go. So now, similar to like when we did the legs, right, I am going to grab this bicep and this bicep, right, because they're at the top of the hierarchy for their respective arms. I'll hit the up arrow to select both of those groups. Then I'm going to select the neck, head, and torso. And all of those, so those 3 objects, these 3, with these 2 groups, I will put in a new group for the upper body. And just like we did for the lower body, I will put that pivot point onto the spinal column. In this case, I'll put it on the top of the spinal column. Oops. Right? And so now, if I turn my shading on, right, I can now pivot and make him bow, right? So checking if everything works appropriately. If I select the hand, it pivots from the wrist, elbow, shoulder, and then up one more time should go to the whole upper body, and then you can pivot him around too. And then additionally, you should be able to pivot the head to look around as well. So if your person can completely be posed by selecting a body part and rotating it, right? And again, as long as I can move through the hierarchy to the appropriate body part with the correct place pivot point, you will do well. So this is what we're looking for. I should be able to select your lower body parts, so the hands or the feet, and be able to move my way through your hierarchy with the pivot points as you move up through your groups being in the correct locations. All right, thank you folks for watching. I'm going to stop recording the video so I can answer your questions.